Hi, and welcome to another episode of Kasper On BI. Today, we're talking about dynamics, and we're talking everything dynamics. How do we get web data into Power BI? What are the types of dynamics there are, and what types of reports will people want to see? What are the tips and tricks to actually get, and also the options of how to get data into Power BI? How can I mesh it up with others? What's the role of Dataverse in all of this? So, for today's episode, I have an expert, Scott Sewell. And Scott is part of the Power BI CAT team. He came over from the Dynamics world because he was also very interested in Power BI. So this is the best combination for us. And he's learned a lot about the combination of the two, and he's here to share all of it with us. So let's go to the episode. Hi, Scott. Welcome to Kasper On BI. I'm super excited to have you here.
It's great to be here.
On the CAT team, so that's pretty exciting. But most people know you for Dynamics because you've been in the Dynamics space for quite a long time. In the Power BI world, not many people probably know you as much yet, but we're going to change that. So maybe you can do a little introduction on what you do and how you started.
Sure. Yeah. So, like you said, I'm on the Power BI CAT team and really focused mostly on customers and trying to drive, help customers gain the value of Power BI, specifically the customers who are using Dataverse as a platform. And as typically people who are using Power Apps, taking advantage of the Power Apps platform or Dynamics. Those are all parts of the platform that I focus on trying to help drive value because there is so much value in that. Kind of got into the CAT team, sort of I'm the oddball out, I think, because I came from the dynamic side. I started deploying Microsoft CRM 1.0 back in 2002, 2003, roughly. And over time, I'm really old. I was deploying it from that perspective, and over time, I would find that my projects, the ones that were going well, were the ones that I spent extra time on developing reporting, very simple analytics. In the early days, we used Crystal Reports. That's all we had until this magical thing called SSRS came out and became part of our platform and how we wrote reports. And I really got excited about that because I just enjoyed that process of trying to turn the information we had in this platform into something usable in terms of data for the managers to make decisions off of. Fast forward for several years, Power BI became more and more a part of the toolkit that I used to show the value of what was in Dynamics to the end user, the customers that were out there. Spent more and more time in that, and then gradually moved over. Got to know Mark and got to know other people on the Power BI CAT team, and moved over really kind of to take that same focus area that I had on the Dynamic side to bring it over and work from the Power BI side to focus back to the Dynamic side. So I'm kind of I'm a little bit of the oddball in the group because I've got this one singular area that I'm super excited about. But it's been fun to be a part of the team because there's really good folks to get a chance to work with and learn from.
Yeah. So that's so I mean I think you already took a look at the notes. So, but your love of data came out of seeing what you can start to do, because in Dynamics it's mostly data in, right? And it's entering large fields of data, and it's really transactional, but not really getting it out. And that's, as you said, once you started doing that.
Maybe I'd prescribe it as such. You're a lot of Dynamics is capturing data and then working through the transaction, like you said, on that data. And you're going to see views of data like tables, sort of like Excel looking views of things, and you're going to see it's got some basic charting and graphing that's built into it, which is really basic pie charts and bar charts that are built over it that are designed for either very small groups or or individuals to say, let me see how many opportunities I worked on this week, or how many cases are outstanding in a particular queue. those are very normal things to see inside of a Dataverse or a Dynamics um, dashboard for that it's built just strictly on the Dataverse platform. But once you start moving up into the enterprise, you start getting into bigger and bigger sets of data. And a manager can't look at a view of just 50,000 records and get much value out of it. The
Yeah.
same way they could if you then digest that information and present it through a Power BI dashboard, for instance, or use some of the AI tools that we have in Power BI, like the key performance indicators, KPIs, and the goals, as well as things like the key influencer visual, which is incredible in terms of being able to ingest a lot of data and start driving out some insights from that data.
Yeah, I can
It's just been
imagine.
it's been a lot of fun to see if we can find a way to connect the dots between what people on the Dataverse side are working on and they're investing a lot of time into, and on the Power BI, what can we do to pull that value out for them?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's take a step back and let's go back to Dynamics world. So
Mhm.
um, what types of dynamics are there? Because I always get confused
Yeah.
when we
So
when we talk. You say, "Oh no, that's a different type of dynamics," and I don't.
right. Yeah, I've recently started calling it Dynamics is kind of a circus tent of a lot of different products. It's really a marketing umbrella for terms of products that are really designed for business operations. There's one product called Dynamics 365 uh, Customer Experience, which is really designed for it's the original CRM product, which is tracking customers, tracking the sales conversations, or tracking support conversations you have with
Hmm,
them, tracking emails, tracking all that. That's part of that Dynamic CE. But then you have another piece that came from Exapta. The old Exapta product was brought in has now become this really rich ERP solution called Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. Now they came from different sources, so fundamentally they were built on different platforms. However, part of the goal of Dynamics is to start it is and it's in motion moving things together so you can use Dataverse as a common data source within the platform. But then you have Dynamics marketing, you have Dynamics customer journey,
yeah.
customer insights, a lot of different pieces that are still under that Dynamics label, but they really serve different teams or different purposes.
All right, that makes sense. So, um, what type of scenarios are you? I mean, you kind of described it already, but what type of
Mhm.
scenarios are there in these dynamics cases? Like, what are some of the best examples that you've seen?
Yeah. So one of the most I'll go with the most common example right now that I spend a lot of time with. Dynamics 365 CE, the customer experience one, is heavily used in the sales process. So customers will get that to track the opportunities they have to sell a product to a customer. They'll track who the contacts are, who the emails that are going back and forth, the type of product they're offering to that customer, as well as any details about what goes into the customer that opportunity is the sales opportunity. It could be, what type of decision process they're in, what type of volume do they do, what kind of discount are they offering. A lot of factors go into that. And so over time, you're seeing that opportunity move forward to the point it either becomes a sale or potentially a loss to a competitor, perhaps.
Hmm,
That's a lot of data that's going on, and even within that, in one transaction, there's a lot of stages and uh, we call them sales stages that it goes through. Initial qualification and that. So there's tons of data in there around any individual single transaction. There's lots and lots of data. What I've done is I'm spending a lot of time with customers who want to mine that to try to find insights to say, what is it that um, when we try to sell this product, what are the factors that lead to a success for that product? Well, is it the industry it's in? Is it the salesperson? Is it the manager? Is it the sales stages that the process goes through? All of that is in there. All that information is in there. It's a matter of mining it and pulling it back out to then turn that into decision-making material. So I'm using Power BI for that. Key Influence is a great piece for that. And then, so that's a good part of it. Then there's just the volume of data. Like if you're looking at a sales, a service organization, worked with a big bank up in the Northeast that was getting huge volumes of service contracts, or not service contracts, but service requests coming through. And one of the challenges that they dealt with was there was a baseline of a request coming from customers, but then there was an additional request level of people inside the business saying, hey, have you talked to this customer about the problem that they're having? Or can you follow up, and I'm following up to ask you about the status of this problem. Or the customer saying, hey, I asked you about this yesterday. Do you have a status on it? And each of those became additional cases that just kept turning into this huge volume of issues. What we did is we layered in a couple of things. Part of it was some AI tools that started saying, hey, these are all related to the same core case, and then looked at ways in which we could say, let's summarize that and find out which one of these problems results in a long case duration. Can we find ways to shorten that duration? Power BI was a great way of looking at that and saying, here are the summaries of things that if you solve this one, even though it's like only a small number of cases, it's the types that extend into really long cases. Or here's one that's only slightly longer than a normal case, but there's a huge volume of that. So if you address this issue, you can reduce and improve the efficiency of your case management process. So really, we use Power BI to help that customer surface those insights that weren't immediately obvious if you're just looking at a table of transactions. By summarizing it and bringing it forward using some of the AI tools that we have built in, we're able to solve for the other things that Dynamics is there to serve. It's just that we've added some insights on top of it that help them, sort of craft the processes that they're working in.
So
it's really a fun process to be a part of.
So that kind of goes me to the next question. I don't think all of this is built into Dynamics itself, right? So what is built into Dynamics itself? And then we'll go through the rest of the stack too. But so what is built into Dynamics yourself?
Yeah, so if we're talking about Dynamics CE, there is let's go to the bottom layer first. At the bottom layer, way down under the covers where you can't reach it, the data is being stored on a SQL Server database, SQL in Azure. But that's way down below the surface of the application. Above that layer is a business logic layer that says, if you make this kind of transaction, these are the things that have to happen to make that transaction. Above that is another layer that says, a security layer. It says, okay, Kasper, you and I are on both salespeople on the team. You're allowed to see these records, and Scott, you're allowed to see these records. And they're not the same records unless you guys are collaborating on a particular record. So there's a security layer in there that can be configured through a lot of mechanisms that allow you to sort of partition off the data that's in Dataverse for that. Above that, you start getting into the UI component, and Dynamics CE is really built on top of this Dataverse sort of data platform. And it's got all the visuals like the forms and the email form and the customer form and the sales process transaction. All those are sort of that UI layer for the customer. Even in that UI layer, there's a handful of some visuals that are available. Ones I mentioned earlier that are they're really good for transactional type of small batch, small volume. For they kind of top out at about 50,000 records. Yeah. But in those cases, down below that, sort of in between that UI layer and the raw SQL down there, that's the Dataverse layer. And that Dataverse layer is where I'm tapping into and saying, let me look at all this data, summarize it, and try to pull it forward for a business user.
All right, that makes sense. And so what about the reporting layer? Is there a lot of out of the box reports too in Dynamics? Now we talk about the
Yeah,
data layer,
there
but
are a few. Yeah. Yeah. So the reports that are built into Dynamics are really designed kind of to showcase the typical use case for Dynamics. They're kind of, I don't want to call them generic, but they are sort of generic because they're trying to be the one size fits all.
Hmm.
What you find is that most customers have unique requirements and unique needs, and they have different sales processes. They have different types of customers, and so Dynamics is very easily, heavily configured to kind of adapt the difference between somebody who's working in a bank and is servicing mortgages versus someone who is providing a service to like a lawn care service to customers, or somebody who's doing a manufacturing business or healthcare. All those have different kind of configurations that you would do. So each of the reporting types of needs really turns into a customization or a configuration process.
Yeah.
Um,
So
the
so
and
Dynamics
so
is
that's where it really. Mhm.
so Dynamics is heavily customizable, right? And it's also no one customer has the same.
Right, right. It's the nice thing is it is designed for what's kind of become the term is the citizen developer. You can get in and design the application to fit your business without writing a single line of code.
Hmm.
You can add additional entities or tables to the platform, add additional columns to a page, and add business logic to it, like this is required under these circumstances, or um, if this record is entered, then do this kind of transaction, or do this, play some automation against it. So there's a lot of that, but you don't have to write any code to do that. So it's very powerful in that way. But because of that power and because of that flexibility, each time you go into a data Dynamics or a Dataverse hosted data, there's a lot of learning to find out what is it the customer's done to the application and what is it they're using it for, so that you can provide some good reporting against that.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked enough about Dataverse. Let's dive in a little bit deeper.
I could talk about Dataverse all day
But
long.
we already have the question on the list, but we already talked about it so many times. So what is it? How can I use it?
What is Dataverse, right? So Dataverse it is the data platform that Dynamics, specifically Dynamics CE, um, and like Power Apps, all those are built using this Dataverse data platform. It's it's the citizen developer configurable data platform that includes all the business logic layers, the the authentication, uh, and security modeling, workflows built into it. There's a ton of things that are built into this Dataverse platform that you can take advantage of. In the old days, I've seen people who would try to use SharePoint as a backend for some data, but SharePoint's not really relational data.
It's still the
SharePoint
number
has
one
its
data
own
source of Power
strengths.
BI, I think. Every
Yeah,
customer I
probably,
talk to,
just
it's
because a lot of data's in it.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So, but with SharePoint data, you don't really have that relational structure that you do in a one that's more constrained towards a database orientation than like SharePoint has a lot more higher flexibility in some areas. So Dataverse is this platform that you can um, deploy and secure, and it includes, as you make a change to the platform, it's updating its own APIs, so you can read and write to it through OData or some other APIs. A lot of places will integrate it using Power Automate to take care of automation. So if you create this kind of record, then it needs to go put something in another application over there. So there's a lot of interactivity and connectivity that goes on in this platform. That's different from if I just wanted to create a table in SQL and stick it up on the SQL Azure database
Yeah.
somewhere. That's fine. I can do that, and I can make that very, very fast. But then if I wanted to deploy it, I would need to build a UI layer. I would need to put in a security model. I would need to put in authentication. I would want to put in some sort of a reporting layer on it, some sort of a logic layer on it. So you start adding these things back in, then you go back, well, it's just already baked in if I use Dataverse or that as a starter point. And again, that's why you find a lot of people who are starting out with Power Apps, which is that same
Hmm.
application modeling experience that you can get. And it's very closely aligned with the Dynamics CE because they're both sitting on top of Dataverse. And so people are building those and saying, I want to build a small internal app that's going to manage this request process or this type of approval thing or keep track of these lawnmowers, whatever it is. They can build that in Power Apps with no coding. It's very secure, it's scalable, and it's sitting up in the Microsoft Cloud. It's ready to go. Then you start getting into, as that thing grows, then you start seeing data that becomes very valuable that you're having challenge getting out through the front end of the UI, or really seeing it. That's where Power Apps steps in and saves the day, or
Yeah.
Power BI does.
Yeah, I was going to say Power BI, yes. So, okay, so let's talk about the next topic then. So, what are ways to get the data into Power BI?
From Dataverse? Yeah.
I mean, let me say
Yeah.
Dynamics, but I think you're going to say, well,
Okay.
it always has to go through Dataverse. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Dataverse is, I mean, if I'm getting it from Dynamics, I'm using the Dataverse connector to pull it out because the data in Dynamics is sitting inside a Database.
Okay,
A
so
data
there's no
platform.
other way. I cannot connect to that secret SQL server that you said was sitting there in the bottom.
The one's way down under
Uh huh.
that's hidden behind that one's hidden way down below the
Sounds
surface,
tempting.
and you want it to be that way.
It sounds tempting.
It is. It sure is. It would be tempting to have access to it, but then you lose all the value of the security model, and you lose the value of the business logic layer that sits on top of it. So,
Yeah, makes sense.
it's a trade-off in that case. So, there's a couple of ways to get the data out of this platform that are set up. There's there's a couple of ways where you can write a SQL statement that goes against what we call the TDS endpoint, the
Actually, sorry,
tabular data
sorry,
stream
sorry.
endpoint. Yeah.
Before we go there, I want to ask one
Okay.
other question before we go there. The data as it is sitting in the Dataverse, what does it look like? Is it like a data warehouse or is it like an OLTP system? And what type of, do you call them tables or entities or?
Yep. There are tables. They were originally called entities, but they've changed the name lately to tables, but same thing.
So,
Yeah. So the data
yeah.
is tables and columns and rows, kind of like what you would see in a database. It is really kind of modeled as a relational database.
So relational database. So you will have like, yeah. Okay. So relational, not data
Yeah.
warehousey style.
Right. So it's not data warehouse. Yeah. So that becomes a little bit of a learning curve later on as you move from one environment to the next.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to get data out of Dataverse, if I'm just a general application user, I mean, there's lots of ways I can do it. I can open up open up a form and see that. I can hit export to Excel. Boom, you got data out. If I really wanted to turn that into data I'm going to be using in Power BI,
Mm-hmm.
a couple ways I can do that. I can connect to what we call the tabular data stream, the TDS endpoint, and I can write a SQL statement against that. It's going against that stream and getting interpreted into SQL later on, but it's going through the logic layer and the security layer to get there. So it's not like you're hitting the table directly, but you are
And
going through that protection layer.
I can just go into Power BI desktop and then pick the connector, and that's what you're talking about.
That's correct.
And then there's a version 2, right? That's the one you need to use. or am I confused?
Yes, it's just the green Dataverse connector.
All right.
Now, the Dataverse connector and the SQL Azure connector are both touching. If you point the SQL Azure connector to Dataverse and you give it, instead of a server name, you give it the Dataverse, like dataverse.crm.dynamics.com.
Mm-hmm.
They're both hitting the same TDS endpoint.
Mm.
Even SQL is going through that logic layer and through that security layer to get data out. So they're both built around that same concept.
And then the security model is the same, right? Because usually it's all
Yes.
AD. So if I connect to my Power BI with Kasper, I will connect with Power BI because the same AD, my same dynamics, where all works across the board.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the strengths of it. We do have a lot of customers that I've worked with that have, some customers, it's like it's wide open. Everybody on the sales team can see and edit every opportunity that's out there for other people on their team. Other organizations are very team or siloed down to either the individual or a small cluster of people. And so again, it's like before, if I'm working on it, maybe my organization has determined that if I'm a salesperson, I can only see my opportunities. And so if I open up the front end, all I can see are my opportunities. If I go to the SQL endpoint and query it, because it's passing my credential over, SQL will only pass back, SQL or Dataverse will only pass back the records that I am permissioned to see. So you can't get around that security model as long as you're, period. It's there. You're going to pull the data out according to you at your credentials as they match up with the credentials inside of Dataverse.
All right, that makes sense. So with TDS, and that's a TDS endpoint that you were talking about.
Yeah.
What are the benefits / downsides? Because I know there are
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, with everything, it's really finding the right size. What tool is the right size to work with? The TDS endpoint is great for that perspective of I'm a user. I have permissions to see some records in Dataverse, but I don't have permission to see every record. And I want a real time. When I open the report, I want it to go fetch the data as it exists right now and bring that back to me. So I can use direct query for that. And direct query has its purposes and its value. You can set up a report that says each of these people that are out there, they open up the report, and if I open the report, it's going to use my credentials to get data from Dataverse. If you open it, it's going to use your data to get the data, your credentials to get the data from Dataverse. And our reports will look different because we have different things we're permission to see inside of Dataverse.
Yeah.
Now, for that flexibility, there is a cost because you're pulling it through all the layers of security to get it out, and it's filtering that out to you. So it's really appropriate for the, uh, tens of thousands of records. That's a great fit for it.
So I mean tens
It
of
could
thousands of
be
records
like
on the wire or tens of thousands of records
coming across. Yeah, and it could be a million records back there, but what you want to you're pulling across the wire to the report. Tens and it's gonna be up to I'll throw an arbitrary limit of 100,000 records. It's not an actual limit, but if rule of thumb, if you're going over 100,000 records, you're moving into an area where it's not really going to be optimal for
I mean,
that.
this is if you're going over 100,000 result sets from in Power BI in general, you're not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's
So
not just dynamics. It's everything.
yeah. So in those cases where the reports are going to be what's like, for instance, I'm working with a large financial services company out of the West right now that had millions of transactions that were in their back end that were stored in Dataverse, millions. But the reports that we were working on only needed to see what's open right now and what's been closed in the last week. So they were just looking at this very narrow slice of the data. And so it was only 10,000 records that were being pulled across. And so that was perfect. On the other hand, Then you start moving up to, well, let me stop before I go beyond that. Let's say that's a direct query approach. There's a second approach, which if you wanted to go ahead and pre-pull the data out using like an admin credential, pull it into a Dataverse model or a Power BI model, and then use that to display it, you can use an import mode as well. That's going to work well for if I want to pull all the records for the Southeast and I'm presenting that to a report for the Southeast. I'm still pulling a kind of a slice of it, but I'm going ahead and pre-extracting all that, getting all that out. That's great for that.
Yeah.
You can add Power BI row level security on top of it if you wish. I've seen that done as well. But
And what
again,
about
you're extracting that.
and what about
Yeah,
incremental refresh?
you can do incremental refresh on that as well. So you can pull that out and keep that up to date. And it's a perfectly good way of having that data out. And then of course, because the data is pre-extracted, the report performance is much faster just interacting on a report, because every time you interact on the report, it's not sending a query back to Dataverse to ask for a fresh set of data.
And then maybe another question, because when you have this TDS endpoint and you're connected in direct query mode, what type of calculations do people do? What is very common things to see in the Dynamics world in the reports, the calculations? Because in direct query mode, it's also not that easy.
Yeah. So most of the ones that I've dealt with so far have been fairly straightforward. I want to do a calculation on, show me all the opportunities that have closed in a certain period, or show me the number of opportunities that were created this month versus prior month. So very straightforward, nothing complicated, nothing extravagant on those situations, because you're not really dealing with data that of some unusual complexity you're dealing with. It's pretty straightforward data. So most of the calculations are, at least so far that I've seen, of course, every time you're dealing with a date calculation, you can get into some interesting challenges, but they're not unusual calculations you see coming off of Dataverse typically.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about direct query and import mode on the TDS endpoint, which is the Dataverse connector. What else?
So those two are kind of your first level for.
Do you need any licenses, special licenses for these things?
If you're licensed for Dataverse, you're licensed to use that, I believe, the connector. So that's part of your permission. You start moving out of that, and then you start dealing like this customer I was dealing with that had millions of records. You may have a situation where you need to write reports for somebody in the C-suite, somebody in the executive level that needs to be able to legitimately has to look at records going back 3 years, millions of records. There's another level of extract that's available, and that's using the Azure Synapse Link. It's kind of a newer. It was promoted last year. It's brought into GA last year. What it does is it listens to the configuration you have in Dataverse, and as you make changes there, it writes those changes out into a data lake. Those data lake records can then be brought in through Azure Synapse and turned into either a serverless SQL, or you can do other things with that you can read against that. And again, you've pulled all that data out of Dataverse and made it available to run massive transactions or massive requests against. And you can either dequeue that, or probably in more cases, you're going to sort of summarize that and bring it in as an import to allow somebody to ingest and draw inferences off of a massive data set.
Yeah, so now you moved,
millions of records is cool for that.
So you moved the data out of Dataverse and you moved it into Synapse.
Yeah.
And it updates periodically, or you can configure it.
There's you determine which tables you want synchronized to that data lake, and it will set up the synchronization, and it will write those out as it goes. And it will do a snapshot, and it keeps there's a JSON file with your metadata in it, So it is it's a complete set of your data. It's not real time because there is it's a synchronization process that takes place.
Yeah.
So we're talking, we're not talking days, we're talking about minutes, sort of difference typically that you're going to see of the records as you make a change inside a Dataverse. A few minutes later, you're going to see that change reflected in the data that's in Synapse.
Mm. Makes a lot of sense. So,
Yeah,
and then you have
yeah.
the
So
full
it's
Synapse experience.
that's the one where there's so much richness in Synapse that you can add to it. The machine learning pieces that are there, again, those are really appropriate for that really large sets of data that you want to go deeper into and say, I want to understand what's going on. So you're bringing the full power of Synapse uh, into the picture and making that part of your understanding
So you
based on the
can
data that. Go
So you
ahead.
can also so when you move the data from Dataverse into Synapse, you can extend the model. Like if you're going to
Right.
use this machine
You
learning,
could
yeah,
right. So you could extend that. You could combine the Synapse data with the Synapse data that's been extracted from Dataverse with data coming in from your data warehouse, from your ERP system, or from an inventory, whatever those systems are, IoT data. They can be brought together, and you can create newer views that have
mm.
data beyond just what's in Dataverse because of Synapse's ability to sort of pull together lots of disparate data into a single view and make inferences off of it.
So and then can you also
A lot
like
of
for
power
example,
there.
yeah, can you then for example do this? So let's say there's a lot of transactions and you're running some market basket analysis over that transactional data that is coming in. So you have the
Mhm.
TDS or the Dataverse that moves the data into Synapse. Then it runs some machine learning algorithm every time it updates the data. And then it just adds some data to that same table, or does it? Yeah, is it in a different table?
Right. I think it would be in a different table at that point. You'd have the keys from Dataverse and
Hmm.
um, your output from your machine learning process,
Yeah.
and you could take that data and it can stay in Synapse, or you could use like Power Automate, one of the other pieces of the platform, to wire that data, and then that data could be sent right back into Dataverse and become a
Oh yeah.
part of the model inside of Dataverse. So you could consume it that way. If you wanted that, an opportunity score or a next best action type of a learning to be displayed to a user inside of Dataverse, you could complete the circuit by sending it back through Power Automate.
Hmm. Sounds very interesting.
It's
Yeah.
a
So
it's an amazing set of tools that can be put together in different ways, and really drive some innovation.
but I can understand what you're saying before. Like TDS endpoint, it's really like you're a business user and like you can just pull it in and it just kind of works. No problems.
Mhm.
But once you start doing like big projects, like it's kind of like the previous episode with Marco, like talking about this is the enterprise BI play. Like you
Right.
have the TDS endpoint, you pull the data from Dataverse, you extend it with other data, and you kind of make it into like a data mart. And
Mhm.
then on top of that, you do your BI.
That's
That
right.
makes sense.
Yeah, you're totally right. And from a small organization, a few hundred users, they may only use the TDS endpoint with their data. That may be all they ever need.
Yeah.
That's great, and it's perfectly suited for that thing. An enterprise may use some TDS reports for the sort of that user level reporting or small group level reporting. They may also use the Synapse side for the bigger enterprise reporting or some of the machine learning capabilities as well. It's a mix that you're going to find between them, and the challenge, sometimes people want to say one size fits all, or I know this one tool, therefore I'm going to use that same tool for everything I do. Of course, you and I both know how challenged that
Yeah.
doesn't work out too well. Um, that's why understanding kind of what are the use cases and what are the strengths and weaknesses or what are the appropriate use cases for these different tools are. That's part of what I'm trying to work to educate my other people in Microsoft as they work with their customers, is to say, hey, here's a good use case for this, or by the way, you're probably going to start maxing out that. When you hit this type of a limit, you may want to consider scaling up into a Synapse for that particular use case.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's fun. It's good. It's a good time.
Yeah, and then I think so. The majority of the questions that you're getting are they're around mostly the latter part, right? The enterprise scenarios. Is that
Right.
more
So
so to
it's a
see?
combination. Yeah, I'm seeing both questions. The fact that we can pull it out from on the Dataverse through the TDS endpoint through that Dataverse connector in Power BI unlocks a lot of people to use Power BI that had never been able to use it before. And so the fact that you can write these queries back, okay, a few years ago when I first wrote my very first Power BI reports against Dataverse, I had to use the OData. I had to craft an OData statement, embed in it this fetch XML, and you could do it. It's just a lot more tedious and a lot nerdier looking kind of a query that you wrote. Now the query is much easier to build, and it's kind of a no code experience that you can click, and you can pull, say, I want this table, and I want these columns out of that table, and I want to filter it according to this, and you set that up and apply it, and you've got your data inside of Power BI. So the barrier to that is lowered dramatically from what it was just a couple of years ago, just a year ago, basically, to now. More and more people are starting taking advantage of that, and as more people take advantage of it, those use cases start hitting that you say, oh, you know what, you're you're trying to import 1,000,000 records. That TDS endpoint is not going to be your friend after 100,000 or so records, just roughly. You probably want to look at something more scalable, like a Synapse approach. Um, so
Yeah, that makes
yeah, so
sense.
it's been fun to have those conversations and to try to help educate people what's possible. I mean, the other part of what's been fun is I've had customers, or internal customers, even Microsoft people, or working with their customers outside of
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, that didn't realize how close Power BI and Dataverse can be, and how nicely integrated they are, where I can do all this data transformation, pull it out through Power Query using that Dynamics adapter, bring it into Power BI, visualize it, and then take that report and stick it right back inside of Dataverse so that it's available to application users over there. So we're seeing that a lot, and it's been fun to show off that sort of round trip process that goes on between the two.
That's really cool. And then actually, my next question is even further round trip. Like James Phillips always talks about, like being able to look at finally be able like get access to the data and then analyze the data and then take an action on it. So how does that work? Like, what are those
Yeah,
steps?
that's one of the most exciting parts of the things I've been able to show and help people experience and look at, is that the full round trip process, where more than just you can take data, and like, for instance, one example I have is I'm looking at all the sales opportunities, and each person on the sales team has a different strength or weakness, and some of them are better at closing sales than others. Some of them are better closing at certain types of businesses than others, or different products. Start bringing that data in, you can visualize that in Power BI. Great. So you're seeing those nuances and the strengths and weaknesses of people, and you find, hey, here's a few people that could you really use some additional training on a specific product, because apparently they're having trouble selling that product. And so you're finding those insights. The great thing is, once you've found that data in Power BI, you can use Power Automate, another part of the Power Platform, and just click a button on that report that says, take this filtered list of users that are having a particular challenge, pass that back into Power Automate, and that Power Automate could then insert them in a SharePoint list. It could send them an email. It could enroll them in a sales program, whatever that process is. But again, you're taking that one process, moving them forward, and then sending it back into action. Another way, so which is a really cool round trip. Another way you can do that is you're bringing it into Power BI, you're seeing it, you can embed inside of a Power BI report, a Power App.
Hmm.
And that Power App could be something like, I'm seeing a list of equipment that's having challenges, and I want to issue a work order against that particular piece of equipment that I'm seeing. I can go into Power BI. I have the app, which is there to be able to sort of accept that whatever request I have, accept it, and then that sends it right back into Dataverse. And then of course that information feeds back. So it's it's a round trip there. So it's not exactly, it's kind of like what we've talked about with write back. That's really a write back approach, is when you say you bring that data into Power BI, and then inside of Power BI you just surface an app that you've configured to say, here's the piece of information I need from you. If you want to issue a work order, or if you want to enroll somebody in sales training, you just put that in your Power App, hit submit, it goes right back into the process.
Yeah.
Really nice connectivity.
Makes sense. So yeah, so that may really close the circle. Like and you can even write it back to the Dataverse, and then you can see the Dynamics application or send the emails, or but to immediately do it from this place that you want to have. Like you're seeing the insights and you want to take an action.
Yeah,
That makes
and
sense.
it's right there in context of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So the amazing thing is how much power we can deliver back to a customer with very little complexity. The real complexity is just kind of being aware of the opportunities you have, or aware of the pieces that are there for you to consume, taking advantage of those and building something cool off of.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And just, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we are working on a document around this too, right? At one point, we're going to have it out,
Yes,
and we're going to
we
share
are.
more details about all of these things. So that's really
So
exciting too.
I will say that there's a good amount of documentation on the site already of the connectivity questions and the different options you have out there. You and we've been back and forth working on a document that really tries to summarize, okay, if I'm walking into this, what do I want to know? What do I want to know up front? And then, as I kind of summarize those pieces, and then point me out to other tools or other documentation that goes
Yeah.
deeper into the explanation of that. But the challenge is, at least in my experience originally, was that I could see all these documents that were all individual documents out there, but there was nothing cohesive that said, okay, here's the big picture that you can look at to understand which direction do you want to go. It was like, here's a solution, here's a solution, here's a solution, here's a solution, and you really didn't know how to say,
Exactly.
which one do I pick between those. What I'm trying to do is kind of give you a roadmap that says, here's the way you think about your problem, here's the directions you can go, and here's the best case for the types of problems that you run into.
That's really cool. I'm really looking forward to that. Okay, so I mean, I think we learned a lot about Dynamics and Dataverse, but before we close off, I have one more question that I always ask everyone. What has been the most exciting feature of Power BI for you that has been released in the last year?
Last year, goals is a strong candidate for that. I would say the other one, well, and the Power Automate, in embedding the ability to put Power Automate
Yeah, I can
inside of a
imagine.
report. Um, I don't know, was Key Influencer? That's been more than a year ago, hadn't it?
I,
2 years.
I think we counted longer. Yeah.
Okay, it'll count. That's the one I have the most fun with,
Mm,
because that's the one that you can look at and really drive some insight out of your data very quickly and surprise yourself with.
I can totally
Um,
imagine,
but
especially
the
in those, because we usually play with, at least I play with fake data, so there's not much interesting things to
right,
find, but real customer data coming out of Dynamics, I mean, I bet there's a ton of interesting things to find.
yeah, it's really. I worked with a customer, a financial services organization up in New York, that I worked with, and when I took the data that they had and just brought in the amazing thing was I'd gotten the key influencer visual from Justinia the day before, and I didn't know about it or anything, but I just saw that it was available, so I stuck the preview version in my report. And I was meeting with this VP of this bank, this guy's a super important guy, and I'm showing him these things, and I just said, by the way, I just got this yesterday. Let me show you what we can find in this. And the amazing thing was when he saw that, he immediately saw the value of how his data that was sitting in his sales process could then turn into decision-making insights that he could use to compete not only with his competitive banks. Frankly, he was competing with other VPs in the organization to say whose sales team is going to be the strongest. And he immediately saw how he could use that information as summarized with Power BI to give him the edge that he needed to be able to make those decisions. And it was kind of funny because he was sitting right beside this other person in the room that I hadn't met, and he stopped me as I was showing this to him. He stopped it, and he turned to the person next to him and said, "This is the kind of stuff I need." And turns out she was the Tableau administrator, and she was like, "Yeah, we don't have that." And he said, that wasn't my question. I was telling you." He said, "This is what I need." And so somebody else in the room goes, "We'll get you a Power BI license." And he goes, "All right, good. Let's keep going." And so, but the cool thing was, it was a feature in Power BI that connected immediately to value for this individual, so that he could solve the problems he dealt with every day by using the insights being pulled out of his data. Data he could see in front of him all day long, but he just couldn't digest it as well as you could digest it using Power BI. So that's been a fun part of the process that's been helping people get access to things that honestly it's sitting right in front of them, but they just can't digest it the way that Power BI can.
Makes sense. All right, cool. I think we learned a lot, especially, I think we need to get the word out, spread the gospel to all the Dynamics people
That's
that
right.
this is available, and just tell people about it. So I'm super excited about it, and I think you're doing some conference sessions too, right? Talking about this.
Right, got SQL Bits coming up, and then I've got presented a few user groups that are coming up.
It's really cool.
This spring, I'll be in Glasgow for the Power Platform Summit there, and it's an interesting process, and I've got some fun demos. The demos at SQL Bits in Glasgow are going to be pretty fun. I've been working on those lately, so
awesome. Looking forward to it.
Good times ahead.
All right, Scott. Thank you so much for your time. I think we learned a lot. So I want to thank you.
Thank you, Kasper.
And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I learned a lot of things about Synapse Link, Dataverse, Dynamics, what are the use cases, and how much more there is for us to gain. If you like this episode, I'll put the links in the description. If you like this episode, hit the subscribe button because there's more to come. If you like the episode, hit the like button. And with that, I'll see you next time.